We are so thrilled to have Dr. Danielle LaSusa here, our guest speaker. She is a philosophical coach and consultant, podcaster, instructor of philosophy here in Portland. She gives tailored philosophical guidance to help individuals and organizations think clearly, choose confidently, and live purposefully. A passionate teacher and coach for the past 13 years, she loves helping people use philosophical thinking to transform their lives. Dr. LaSusa earned her PhD in physiology. Sorry, that's my husband. Philosophy. Woo! Philosophy. And a graduate certificate in women's studies. Yes! From Temple University in Philadelphia, and she teaches here in Portland at Portland Community College. Please help me welcome Dr. LaSusa.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's a real delight to be here with you all today. Okay, so by a quick way of introduction, I just wanted to explain a little bit about what a philosophical coach and consultant is, because if you have not heard of that, you're not alone. And as Tiffany said, I have a PhD in philosophy, and so I help individuals and organizations think through everyday lives. I help them think more clearly, choose confidently, live purposefully. Philosophy is a discipline that deals with like the fundamental questions of the human experience, right? Questions about identity, meaning, purpose, value, how do we know things, what should we do? And there's a whole body of literature from people who have thought about these things in really deep and profound ways for thousands of years. So I draw upon those, the tools and that wisdom to help people live and work better. I also am the co-creator and co-host of a podcast called Think Hard. And our little tagline is, Think Hard is the podcast where two trained philosophers think hard about the real world. So we bring philosophical thinking to everyday topics in culture, politics, art, society. We've talked about everything from political protests to teen movies. We had an episode called In Defense of Snobs. It's fun, lively, engaging conversation about philosophical, or using our philosophical thinking to shed light on everyday issues. So you can find that, that's our website, thinkhardpodcast.com, and you can find it wherever you can find podcasts. Okay, so on to my talk. I'm going to call this talk Hope in a Godless World. 1 billion children worldwide are living in poverty today. 1 in 3 women will be the victim of sexual violence within her lifetime. In the United States, students of color are overwhelmingly more likely to attend a low-resource and low-performing school. The top 1% of the richest people in this country own 35% of the country's wealth. And the ocean sea levels have risen 4 to 8 inches in the last 100 years, and the rate of that has doubled in the last 20 years. There are lots of reasons to feel hopeless and overwhelmed these days. That's it, thank you. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right, so there are lots of reasons to feel hopeless and overwhelmed these days. Now, for those who believe in a higher power, in a divine, all-knowing, benevolent consciousness, that's a good place to look for guidance for when things are looking down and where to feel better. And perhaps you may believe in the notion that God has a plan for everything. Or perhaps there's a belief that if we can make it through this world with all its suffering and its pain, if we can muddle through, that after this world there'll be another one, an afterlife that will be better, and that gives a sense of hope. But for those who don't believe in a transcendent being or a transcendent realm, who think that this tragic rock we're all spinning on is all there is, it's hard to know sometimes where to look when things are looking grim. Where do we find guidance? Where do we find hope? So one answer to that question may be to focus on the good things that the world has to offer. You know, like bunnies. It's really cute. Or sunsets. Or good food. Or loving families. Or music, laughter, dancing. Or the smell of earthworms and dew and the early morning on the first day of spring. There are lots of wonderful things in this world. And if we all spend more time focusing on those, we'd all probably feel a little bit more hopeful. And that's a great practice. But it doesn't always feel satisfying, because sometimes it can feel like a distraction from the real issues, the problems. Those problems don't go away. Especially when the things that we are concerned about is that there are people in this world that do not have access, perhaps, to good meals and hot showers. And so, what are we to do then? So another answer to the problem might be to practice our silver lining attitude, right? But work on the glass is half full kind of approach, where we look at the world and we say, okay, so, you lost your job, but, you've got experience and education. You don't really like that job anyway. Things will look up, which of course is like enough to make you want to punch somebody in the face, right, when they say that. And sometimes when the issues are big, when we're dealing with poverty, violence, social injustice, global warfare, it sometimes can feel really hard to compile a case of evidence for why things are looking good. It doesn't feel genuine. In the aftermath of the 1992 LA riots, public intellectual, philosopher, and activist Cornel West was interviewed. Now, if you don't remember, the LA riots were 6 days when South Central Los Angeles was in chaos after the acquittal of police officers who brutally assaulted African-American man Rodney King. And homes and stores were looted and broken into. Violence broke out. 63 people were killed. Thousands were injured. Entire city blocks were burnt to the ground. And in that aftermath, Cornel West said, people are feeling such despair, right? It was like this powder keg of racial injustice and poverty and anger erupted. But he said, despair is a place where we begin. It is not a place where we end. We begin with despair, and then we have to face it. And we face it with courage and not with optimism, but with hope. And he distinguishes between the two. So he says that optimism is this kind of glasses half full attitude, where we try and compile a case. We look at the evidence and try and cobble together a case for why things are going to look good, right? Why things might get better. He said, no, what we need instead is not optimism, because as we said, that doesn't always feel genuine and it doesn't always work. What we need instead is hope. And here's what he said about hope. He said, hope looks at the evidence and says that it doesn't look good at all. It doesn't look good at all. We're going to go beyond the evidence to attempt to create new possibilities based on visions that become contagious, to allow us to engage in heroic actions, always against the odds, no guarantee whatsoever. That's hope. And that's the kind of hope that I'm going to talk about today. Now, in order to really understand this kind of hope, we need to think a little bit more about what it means to live in a world without God. Or at least without a God that guides us to what is good and right and true. For those who don't believe in a transcendent being that gives guidance and tells us how we ought to act and what we ought to believe and what we ought to do, where are we to find guidance? And the answer, for better or for worse, is us. It is we, human beings, decide for ourselves in our relationships with each other and with the natural world, individually and collectively, now and historically, in our institutions, our relationships, our social norms, our actions, and in our laws. We create this world. We shape it into what it is. We decide what is valuable and how we ought to behave. Now, some of you may be looking around and thinking, I didn't choose this world. And if I had, it certainly wouldn't look like this. And I get it. It's not like an individual, you can just think of the world you want and there it is. It's a collective effort, right? And it's something that's been handed down to us through generations, right? And sometimes those choices made in the past can feel like they solidify into structures that start to feel intractable, right? Like a groove carved into a rock until it gets to the point where you can't even imagine it going a different direction. But the amazing thing about understanding that we humans shape this world is understanding that we have the power to change it. As a human world, each of us must recognize and accept the responsibility in participating in its ongoing creation. And I'm not saying that we can make the world into whatever we want, right? We can't undo the past. If a loved one has died, no amount of envisioning or imagining is going to bring that person back. We can't wish away slavery, or we can't imagine that a world in which a certain someone had never been elected, for example. Instead, we need to see and we need to understand things as they are. We need to look at the evidence, even when it doesn't look good at all. Right? And that process of learning and seeing things as they are, of becoming finally aware of the ways in which power and money and injustice operate, that can be really devastating. Right? The polar ice caps are melting how much? Black people are how much more likely to be killed by police? The US government gave weapons to who now? What? My first year of college, when I started really challenging some of my safe and cozy mythologies that I grew up with and started learning some more things about the world, I spent a lot of time in tears. And of course, that loss of innocence comes to all of us at different times and in different ways. But at times it can feel like the more we learn about the world, the more disappointing and terrible it can seem. And yet, it is important that we learn it. As author Henry James said, we need to be finely aware and richly responsible. Part of taking responsibility for the creation of this world is to know what is happening in it. If we just put our heads in the sand and pretend like it's not happening, we are still making a choice. We are choosing to tell ourselves and to tell others that it is better to ignore problems than to face them, to remain ignorant rather than enlightened. So, we need to look at the evidence, as Cornel West said, even when it doesn't look good at all. And then we must be richly responsible for our attitudes and actions in the face of those circumstances. We must decide what to do. Several years ago, I heard an interview with a man named Dr. Dan Gottlieb. In 1979, he was a 33-year-old successful psychologist and therapist. He was married and had 2 kids, was well respected in his field. And one day he was hit by a semi-truck, and he woke up in a hospital bed paralyzed from the neck down. And over the following weeks and months and years, he fell into a deep depression, and he was overwhelmed with anger and bitterness and resentment. His wife left him eventually. And he talks about how one night it got so bad he had to sit down, he had a kind of dark night of the soul with himself. And he had to have a conversation with himself. And he said in this conversation that he had to give up on hope. But what I think he really meant is that he had to give up on optimism. He had to give up on the idea that maybe there would be some new treatment or some new surgery or some way that the doctors could fix him, make him walk again, give him his old life back. Right? Instead, he had to look at the evidence as it is, and he had to decide, is this a life that I choose? Can I imagine a future for myself in which I can contribute something positive to the world? Because if not, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. He said he was going to kill himself. Talk about your existential crisis, right? Like, his very existence was at stake. And sometimes that is what it's like for some of us. Now, luckily, most of us don't have to choose life as a quadriplegic, but we do have to choose a world full of other kinds of disappointments and tragedy and pain and suffering. But that choice, that movement, that decision to look at it and say, yes, I choose this, that is hope. Hope is not just feeling good when things are looking up, right? As Cornel West said, that's optimism, right? Oh, things are turning in my favor. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling optimistic. No, hope is looking at the world when things look terrible and saying, I am going to choose it anyway. I am going to choose to believe and to imagine and to envision and to work and create and act anyway. Hope is not a feeling, it's a decision. It is something that we choose. Hope is a kind of faith, not in God, but in ourselves, in each other, in our abilities to imagine and to create a better future for ourselves and our world. And choosing hope and holding it in our minds and hearts is critically important, but it's not enough. We can't just imagine a better world and poof, there it is, right? This is not like the magic of positive thinking. It's not the secret. We need to act. We must act. Not only because that is how things actually change, but also it is through our actions that we demonstrate our choices, that we demonstrate what we value and what we believe. Right? Because if we say we choose a better future and then we don't do anything about it, then we haven't really chosen it. If we say we choose hope and then we let apathy and cynicism and despair win out, then we haven't really chosen it. We need to act. We need to own up to the responsibility of being a co-creator of this world. It's scary. And you may be thinking, where do I even begin? The world is so big, and there are so many problems, and they are so overwhelming, and I am just one measly little human being. We humans can't leap tall buildings in a single bound. We can't move things with our minds, and in the grand scheme of things, we don't even really live that long. And some of these changes are going to take lifetimes, generations of lifetimes to change. So again, you need to choose. You need to pick one small piece of the problem, one small way that you can move toward that better imagined future. And you need to do the work. And don't spend too much time wringing your hands about which problem to choose or what to work on. Pick one. There are plenty of them. Pick one that speaks to your heart, that you have the knowledge and understanding and skills and talents to help with. And do it. And commit to creating that future little by little, day by day. Look, let's be real. No one is going to change the world in one fell swoop. And the truth of the matter is, you may devote a lifetime to doing your part and working towards it, and there's still no guarantee that things are going to change. Jean-Paul Sartre was a French philosopher and existentialist of the 20th century. He was also a political activist, and he was very active in the Communist Party in Europe at the time. And he devoted his life to it. And he wrote, look, after I die, there may be people who decide to set up fascism. And there may be others who are too cowardly or confused and will let them. And so much the worse for humanity. He said, I shall have no illusions, and I shall do what I can. For example, suppose I ask myself, will socialization as such ever come about? I know nothing about it. All I know is I'm going to do everything in my power to bring it about. Beyond that, I can't count on anything. Hope in a godless world means that there are no guarantees. But deciding to envision and believe and do the work anyway. Little by little, day by day. Preach, yeah. Now for some of you, it may feel a little like this. Right? If you remember, Sisyphus was punished by the gods as a Greek myth, and he was punished by the gods, and he was condemned to spend the afterlife rolling a boulder up a hill only to just reach the top and have it come rolling past him down to the bottom again for eternity. Now, Sartre's contemporary, Albert Camus, wrote an essay wondering, why does Sisyphus keep pushing the boulder up the mountain? Like, what's happening in his head on that walk back down the hill? Why not just stop? Just give up. Sit down. I mean, granted, it's kind of a desolate landscape. There's not like Netflix for him to... But at the very least, you could take a nap or something. Right? But you can't sleep forever. And whether Sisyphus likes it or not, as Camus puts it, the rock is his thing. It's his task. It's what he's got to work with. It's what's there. And through that engagement and through that effort pushing the rock back up the hill, he experiences his humanity. And so he gets up and he tries again, working, striving, believing, when all the evidence is against him, with no guarantee of success. This is hope. Hope envisions a new idea only to be laughed at or told that it is all but impossible, and yet continues to dream of a new world anyway. Hope risks an attempt at change only to make missteps, hit roadblocks, and suffer repeated failures, and nevertheless gets back up after each one and tries again. Hope is disappointed by people and sees their cruelty and ignorance and greed and selfishness, and yet continues to have faith in human kindness and compassion and strength. Hope knows that the problems are big, bigger than we could ever solve in one lifetime, and yet chooses some small piece of the problem, some small work to do, and does the work day by day. We choose hope because we are human beings, and this world is our thing.